Stacy and I had been dating for a while. We had a shared love for outdoor activities, and so camping was a natural choice for one of our dates. One weekend, we packed our gear and drove to a nature reserve not too far from town. To ensure some privacy, we set up our camp away from the other campers in a secluded spot that offered peace and quiet. The nature reserve was beautiful with a serene lake at its heart. Stacy had never tried fishing before, so we decided to give it a go. As we stood by the lake, I noticed an unusual silence, the kind that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand on end. Sometime later, I glanced across the lake and saw a group of men. They were just standing there, staring at us from the opposite shore. A chill ran down my spine, but I tried to shake it off, not wanting to alarm Stacy. I suggested we head back to our campsite, and she agreed without question. Back at the campsite, a strange feeling overtook me. As I rummaged through my bag, I felt like something was off, as if someone had gone through our things. Stacy was busy setting up for dinner, so I decided to let it go. Perhaps I was just being paranoid. The evening passed pleasantly. We had a simple dinner, followed by a few rounds of beer, and soon the exhaustion from the day's activities caught up with us. We crawled into our tent, falling asleep almost immediately. In the middle of the night, I was jolted awake by Stacy shaking me. Her face was pale with fear. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I strained my ears, and sure enough, there were faint footsteps outside our tent. Someone was circling us with slow and deliberate footsteps. I put on a brave face, trying to reassure Stacy that everything was fine, though I knew it was far from it. I grabbed my flashlight and, gathering all my courage, unzipped the tent. "Who's out there?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the darkness. As I stepped out, I swung the beam of the flashlight around, and there they were, a group of 7 or 8 men circling our tent. They all wore hoodies. I don't remember their facial features apart from their unnervingly blank eyes. Panic surged through me. We were outnumbered and isolated. I turned to Stacy and yelled, "Run!" We bolted from the campsite, leaving everything behind. The only thought in my mind was to get away, to reach the car and escape this nightmare. Finally, we somehow made our way to our car. We got inside, slamming the door shut, and I wasted no time in starting the engine. As we were making our way out, I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was no sign of the men. Even though we were safe, the eerie silence of the night kept reminding us of how close we had come to something sinister. We never went back to that nature reserve, and I often wonder who or what those men were. One thing was certain, something was watching us by the lake that night, and we were lucky to escape. I love camping and wanted to pass on that same love to my kids, Rhonda and Stephen. One weekend, I planned a trip to a nature reserve near our city, hoping to share this passion with them. My wife Rochelle and I were eager to see their excitement. The kids were thrilled, and their enthusiasm made me feel excited too. We set up our tents in the quiet, shadowy clearing surrounded by tall trees. After a brief hike through the lush greenery, we returned to our campsite. The views were mesmerizing, and the peace of nature was a welcome change from our everyday lives. As the sun dipped below the horizon, we gathered around the campfire. The evening was filled with the warm fire and the aroma of roasted marshmallows. We shared ghost stories and tales of my own camping adventures, laughing and enjoying each other's company. It was a perfect night, one that felt like it was strengthening our bond away from the usual life controlled by social media. But that peaceful night was about to take a dark turn. Rhonda and Stephen were sleeping in separate tents, and around midnight, I was jolted awake by their screams. My heart raced as I dashed outside, where I found them both visibly shaken. Rochelle was doing her best to calm them down, but their fear was on a level I cannot explain. They told us they had seen the outline of a man against the tent, and felt someone trying to get inside. Just as I was trying to make sense of what they had said, we heard a twig snap nearby. Instinctively, I turned toward the sound. I was furious. I was about to charge in that direction when something whizzed past me and hit the ground with a thud. A medium sized rock had landed right on the campfire, extinguishing the flames in an instant. We were engulfed in darkness. Panic set in. My own fear grew tenfold as I realized the gravity of the situation. I turned to my family and urged them to run. My mind was racing as I tried to remember the trails we had hiked earlier. We reached our car in about half an hour. I had never felt such a tense and terrifying experience in my life. The drive home was silent as each of us was lost in our thoughts, trying to process the night's events. We returned home early the next day. The camping trip, which had started with such promise, had turned into a chilling ordeal that none of us would soon forget. As we unpacked, I couldn't help but feel sad. I wanted my kids to know the fun and thrill of camping, but in turn, I don't think my kids will ever want to go camping ever again. I have always found peace in the quiet embrace of nature. As a solo camper, I cherished the solitude, the feeling of being alone in the vast wilderness. Despite the countless scary stories I had heard about solo campers, I always took every precaution. I wasn't one to be easily scared, but what happened on my last trip was something I could have never anticipated. Before setting out on this particular trip, I had planned every detail. The weather forecast was clear: no rain, no storms, just a peaceful weekend in the woods. Confident that everything would go smoothly, I packed my gear and headed to a secluded spot deep in the forest, far from any signs of civilization. The day was perfect. I found a spot to set up my tent, nestled among the trees, with a small clearing that offered a view of the distant mountains. It was exactly what I had envisioned. As the evening approached, I settled into my tent with a book on my Amazon Kindle. The stillness of the forest was comforting. It felt like the perfect escape. But as night fell, the calmness of the day began to shift. Around midnight, I was startled awake by the sound of rain. I had checked the forecast multiple times. There wasn't supposed to be any rain. Yet here it was, pounding against my tent, the sound growing louder and more insistent with each passing minute. Within minutes, the ground beneath my tent turned to mud, and water started seeping in. Panic set in as I realized I had nothing to protect myself from the unexpected downpour. My tent was no longer safe. It was quickly becoming a swamp. I knew I had to move fast. In the pitch darkness, I scrambled to pack up my belongings. My hands were shaking as I stuffed everything into my backpack. I needed to find shelter, and fast. But I was deep in the woods, far from any known trails or roads. My heart pounded as I made my way through the darkness. Just when I thought I couldn't go any further, I saw it. A faint light in the distance. It was a house, standing alone in the middle of the woods. I had never felt such a relief in my life. I hurried towards the house. When I reached the door, I knocked, half expecting no one to answer at this hour. But to my surprise, the door creaked open, and a man in his late 40s appeared. He didn't hesitate when I explained my situation, inviting me in without a second thought. His wife soon joined us. She was a quiet woman with sharp eyes that seemed to see right through me. There was something unsettling about her, but I was too exhausted to think about it. They showed me to a guest bedroom upstairs, a small, cozy room with a bed that looked like heaven after the ordeal I had just been through. I thanked them and quickly changed into dry clothes. But as I lay down, that uneasy feeling returned. It was stronger this time. There was something off about the house, something I couldn't put my finger on. I was too tired to think straight. Despite the nagging feeling in the back of my mind, I drifted off to sleep, hoping that the morning would bring some clarity. But sleep didn't come easy. I was awakened by a noise. I sat up in bed, wanting to hear the same sound again or for something to happen. I told myself it was just the old house settling, that I was being paranoid. But just as I was about to lie back down, I heard it again. This time, the sound of creaking floorboards, as if someone was walking just outside my door. My heart began to race. I didn't dare move, listening intently as the footsteps grew closer. They stopped right outside my door. Then came the whispers, faint, indistinct murmurs. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it was enough to scare the living hell out of me. My hand reached for the lamp beside the bed, but I stopped myself from turning it on. I didn't want to alert whoever was outside. I slowly got out of bed, my feet barely making a sound on the wooden floor. The whispers stopped, and then, without warning, the door rattled violently, as if someone was trying to force it open. Fear surged through me. I grabbed my bag and opened the window and jumped outside. The rain had stopped, but the ground was still slippery. I ran as fast as I could, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from that house. I didn't stop until I reached the road. I had no idea how far I had run. I walked for what felt like hours. Finally, I saw lights, a small town up ahead. I stumbled into the first motel I found, barely able to stand. The receptionist took one look at me and handed me a key, no questions asked. I locked myself in the room. I spent the entire next day in that room, too afraid to leave, too tired to do anything but lie. When night fell, I caught the first bus home. That was my last solo camping trip. The wilderness, which was once my refuge, had turned into a nightmare I would never forget.